This is the Delta Huddle Podcast.
Hello, I'm Stefan Stenners, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome you to the first episode of the Delta Huddle Podcast. At Centercode, we believe in technology's ability to make everybody's lives better. And over the past 2 decades, we've used the power of user testing to improve products, find solutions, and discover user delights. Now we're ready to bring those best practices and industry insights directly to you in the Delta Huddle Podcast. In the Delta Huddle Podcast, we aim to bring together industry experts and visionaries to share their insights about building products and bringing them to market. Dive deep into the world of Delta testing, learn about the struggles and successes of testing programs, and ultimately push the boundaries of what's possible in user testing. In this episode, our VP of Marketing, Chris Rader, sat down with Luke Freiler, CEO of Centercode, and David Perry, CEO of Carro. David is a member of the Centercode Board of Directors with a successful history in tech and gaming. His new business, Carro, is an e-commerce partnership network used by over 30,000 Shopify brands, and his previous company, Gaikai, was acquired by Sony PlayStation to establish leadership in the future of streaming video games from the cloud. That service is now known as PlayStation Now. Both David and Luke brought some incredible insights and wisdom to the table. Together, they tackled topics such as the direct benefits of user testing, brand evangelism, tech optimism, doing more with less, and maintaining user delight. On behalf of everyone at Centercode, we can't wait for you to join us on this journey through Delta testing. And thank you for tuning in. Without further ado, this is the Delta Huddle Podcast.
David and Luke, we're excited to have you on. I understand you both have known each other for some time. How did you meet?
I can kick this one off. It was kind of a fun story, actually. So long ago, when David was deep into Gaikai and looking for different options to bring that to market, he actually reached out to us as somewhat neighbors. He was just a short town away and was looking to find a way to use streaming gaming as a mechanism to help product testing. And he had some really great ideas that would alleviate some common challenges at the time. And we ended up getting together to talk about that. But the way we actually became friends, which was kind of a weird thing for Southern California, was we went out to lunch. I don't know how much of this you remember, Dave, but we went to lunch at CPK, and there was a crazy weather storm. And it flooded the parking lot. We were sitting in this CPK, intended to be just a normal casual lunch. We were sitting in this CPK, and we're listening to car alarms go off outside as the water is literally engulfing these cars. I remember a Corvette, a brand new Corvette, that was, basically up to its door handles in water because Southern California is not designed for rain. And we basically got stuck at this CPK for about 4 hours. And in that time, just realized we had a lot in common, became friends, and we've kept in touch ever since. And at a certain point, as Centercode was growing, and I had already looked at Dave as a mentor with a long, successful history, I asked him to join the board as an advisor and to help work and shape the company. And he's been a phenomenal resource with just incredible big ideas ever since. So he had his wonderful exit to Sony on what became a really great service. And what was really cool about that was Dave's perspective then changed to just really big ideas. He had been one of those people in tech that had already kind of hit that success that everyone was looking for. So for him to, and he expressed this to me very early on, for him to feel like he reached the next level, he needed to add a zero to that next acquisition and that next opportunity. So that was kind of how we started. I'll let you add anything you want, Dave, but that was a fun day, and I still fondly remember it.
It was crazy. We literally watched people wading out to the cars to save them.
Boats going out.
You can just imagine you're looking at your car going, what do I do? Do I go and save my car or what? And it was shocking to see how much rain came down so fast. That actually happened to me another time, Luke, that's kind of funny, is years ago, there was a car that came out, the Dodge Viper, and it was a really cool cherry red sports car that Dodge decided to make. And I bought one of the early ones, and it had no roof on it. And I one day got a chance to meet with the head of Sega, who had flown out from Japan. And so to have the head of Sega visiting was really exciting. So I took him to this restaurant in Laguna Beach, And we were in the restaurant, and it's all glass walls, and I'm looking at my car outside, and it starts raining, and it's just the same kind of weather as that day. It was a downpour, and I'm sitting there trying to have this really important dinner, but I'm looking at my car just dying outside the window. So then the dinner came to an end, and I'm thinking to myself, what do I do? Do I walk? Do I go get in that car in front of him? Do I literally have to walk away and just pretend it wasn't mine? And then I finally went back and got in the car and saved it, but it was just trash. The amount of rain that ended up in that car was ridiculous. But so there you go. I do remember that day. What was cool, I think, was the conversation really got into tech, and I think that's been a fun thing with you. Is of all the people I know, you're one of the ones that really pay attention to what's going on, and so we usually start catch-up conversations with what new tech have you bought, or what are you into, or what have you heard about, or what's going on. Companies and ideas and industries tend to connect more than you would think, and so a crazy one that happened to me was I got a call one day saying I was making the video game for the Matrix movies, and I got a call from someone at Neverland saying, "Can you? Is there any way Michael Jackson could play your game before it launches?" And so I got into my car and drove to Neverland and let him see the game, and we hit it off. But in reality, I found across the board, in all industries and all walks of lives, these people have grown up playing video games now. And when I first started to meet with companies, I realized that the senior executives, this was early in the game industry, the senior executives had never played video games and could care less about us. So I'd be sitting in these board meetings with older people, and they basically had nothing to say, no interest in what we were doing. But in a very short period of time, they moved on, and then the people who are now in charge, the CEOs, CFOs, all those people grew up with video games in their homes, and so we're super welcome now, super welcome everywhere.
Yeah,
and that was a really fun sort of experience. I once gave a commencement speech at a university about what I'd experienced, and I kept saying that these doors will open, and you really have to decide whether or not you'll walk through those doors. Will you take those opportunities? I used to live in England, and here I am living in America. I got an opportunity, I got on a plane and came over. And so at the end of my commencement speech, the dean was just really, really annoyed at me because he's like, it's not about luck, it's about education.
Yes.
So it's kind of funny. Like the world is all about education. Not really. What happens is doors open, and you get on the plane or you don't get in the plane, and that can change everything. Yeah. And so I've had a lot of fun with all these interesting companies and sort of introductions, and you might be at the right place at the right time or meet someone at an airport or whatever. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So what about, I'll say Centercode, but it's probably a little bit of Luke and Centercode. What about Luke and Centercode drew your attention? Why did you gravitate towards that?
Well, when you come from the game industry, testing is just part of your DNA. It's something you do all day, every day. And testing is critical to success. And what happened was I liked the way Centercode was thinking, because it was thinking forward, like, where's testing going? Not just, we're just going to help you with your testing. It's like, what is the future of testing? And then if you looked at the portfolio of companies that they had worked with, it was so impressive. Like the brands, the library of brands that they've worked with was incredible. And I also liked little touches, like at the time they were making it clear. I remember once seeing a website version that Luke was working on, and it had like a home, and you could see all these different devices around the home that they would support testing on. But they also had things like drones in the shot, and it just made me go, if I'm in the drone industry, it's great to see that you're calling me out as someone that we could work with Centercode too. And so this idea of covering all consumer electronics or any kind of software, whatever the testing is needed, is important. But where it really got me was this idea that our relationship with electronics and products has overall changed, and that relationship is now long term. Like, I need to get my next Apple device to flawlessly and effortlessly upgrade itself and move on. And so that idea of sort of long-term relationships with your devices and having this, effortless experience as you continue to go, I think is very important. In the game industry, there's a game called FIFA Soccer, and I remember at one point they realized that too, which is it's not cool to resell you the exact same game over and over and over and over with just some different stats and maybe a few graphical changes. In reality, if I'm in this world and I'm investing into building players and building teams and setting everything up the way I want it, I want that to last for as long as I work with this software. And so this idea of delta testing, I think, captivated me, and it was and the fact that so many great companies are working with Centercode, that's why I just wanted to know more about it and get involved.
Yeah. I remember when I first saw Centercode office, when I came in, I worked at Western Digital before meeting Luke, and I came into the Centercode office. In the back wall, he had a bunch of portraits of all the brands that he worked with. I was like, what the heck? This is like every freaking brand. Like, what else could you need? And it was so captivating to me. And I had worked at WD in beta testing, and I met with Luke, and I didn't know this existed. Like, he came and pitched, testing to WD, and I didn't know that these problems were like relevant in a lot of other companies. And it was so nice to be able to talk to somebody that also saw those problems. And that's like one of the things that drew to me, because testing happens everywhere. You have to test before you release your product. You should test your product before you put an update out, because why would you release something that could give you negative brand imagery? Like, just having that negative notion around you is not necessarily the best thing.
It's absolutely critical. It's life and death for products, and I think this idea of delta testing is really important. This lifelong relationship with your customers, and I think that it's going to impact every industry, because we're at that point where most products have some kind of software or firmware or some kind of
definitely.
I sort of am creating an account and it lives with me. So this is all stuff that really, really matters. And there's not very many companies that are going to be able to avoid that future. And so if they want to do it properly, then that's a great reason for Centercode to focus there.
Yeah.
I think Dave touched on something really important that led to kind of where we went with all of this, which is that I look at it as two sort of vectors that are working against each other. One, products are just empirically getting more complex. It is we've had a lot of basics that we sort of build on constantly over time. So there was a point in time when, the digital thermostat was new, and now it has 1,000 times more features and talks to, 50 more products. And many of those are going to come out after it's purchased. So products are just inherently getting more complex. At the same time, and I consider this a pretty awesome thing, those products are being used by a much more diverse group of people. And, back in the day, go back to when we were sort of young in our careers, tech products, and first of all, were kind of few and far between, but they were used by tech people. Mm-hmm. And tech people, one of the defining things of a real tech-savvy person, sadly, is that we have pretty high attention spans, and our patience is there to deal with problems and whatnot. But as a product gets more sophisticated, so there's more opportunity for error, and the audience gets more diverse, more mainstream, which means they have less patience for those errors. The problem is getting bigger and more consequential on both sides. So and then the cherry on top, and this is dialing into what Dave said, is that you don't just kind of have a fire and forget strategy anymore. You don't release a product and then let other teams handle it while you can work on the next one for the next 3 years. The reality is you're going to put out something that's hopefully very strong, and then you're going to continue to iterate on it as the ecosystem around it is iterated on. And, you don't know what new standard Apple or Google or whoever is dependent on your product, or your product is dependent on them. You don't know what's going to come out in a year, but the customers who bought that product are going to expect it to keep working when that happens. So everybody's kind of working against each other in an increasingly complex environment with increasingly general audiences, mainstream audiences. So the problem's getting harder. And to sort of touch on the topic I think we're planning to dial in today, which is kind of how the recession impacts all this is, one of the things that I'm pretty convinced we're going to see in a recession is just fewer product releases and more reliance on those releases being hits. There is a world where when the recession is going, when there is no recession, when the economy is going great, that's when you start experimenting. That's when you start investing that extra money in new ideas and big shots. But once you kind of dial down and you don't have as many resources to deal with, then all of a sudden you need those fewer releases to hit and pay the bills. And therefore, you need to do everything you can to bulletproof that product when the economy is at risk. So to me, it's sort of these forces that have already been brewing in technology and technology usage. Now you cross that with a recession and decline and concerns about the near-term future at least. And you really have to think differently. So that's part of why we're kind of excited to help companies get through this process the best we can.
I think one of the things that I find interesting is the potential for Centercode to start taking a leadership position in helping companies understand how to do this properly. So not necessarily, it's when you're a company, and some large company like Federal Express wants to use your software, then you need to comply with whatever their systems are. But over time, I think you want to start thinking about how can you create the leadership sort of direction to help people understand how to do things right, how to do it really well, how to do it super efficiently, and how to make the customer absolutely as happy as they could possibly be. An example is I just spent some time with my mother. She's 82, and I was trying to teach her how to use an iPad. And it was funny because I showed her how to do things, and it seems somehow obvious to a techie person, but when you're 82, it's not obvious. And I left her with it for some time, and then she said to me, "Look, I just can't get the icons back." And she was basically getting stuck in programs because you have to flip up from the bottom of the screen to get the icons back. And in the game industry, what we learned is you can do things like frustration tracking. So you can start to see, like, this person is clearly lost. They're walked around this room 18 times. There's a door handle over there that they somehow don't see. So why don't we do something, a sparkle or whatever over there, so we can get your attention on that door handle and get you out of this room that you're stuck in. That idea of frustration tracking is one that, at some point, I wish the iPad said, I've noticed you doing this motion 180 times. At some point, can the software kick in and help? And so, overall, this idea of sort of creating almost a leadership guide in each industry over time. Obviously, this is a major thing work-wise, but over time, it could be very helpful for certain companies to start thinking the really modern way to go about creating their products, so that testing is just a core piece of how it's getting developed, and making the customer's journey as silky smooth as it can possibly be. What we learned in the game industry is everything's funnel based as well. So you lose people all the time every step of the way. So how do you get them through those funnels? And it's the same with the customers for all these different services and companies out there, is how do they hold on to their customers? How do they not lose them on their customer journey with them? So I think there's a lot of leadership stuff that Centercode could start to generate to help with the sort of strategies and things above and beyond the technology and the platform.
Yeah.
You definitely hit on a lot of our journey and kind of how we've been thinking. When we started this company, the goal was to sell a product to very small companies and help them run these types of tests, because we saw the opportunity to connect companies to their customers in a complex product environment as a great opportunity. And it was actually the very large companies that first latched on, the companies we never thought would even be an opportunity for us. We thought they were way too big. And that has really fueled the growth of the company, and that's where we've gone. But sort of alluding to some of what Dave said, that led us to build sort of a sandbox approach over time. We had a very extensive platform aimed at an audience that needed that level of flexibility and had a lot of opinions about how things should work relative to their context. What we basically spent COVID doing was kind of rewinding and going back to our roots a little bit and saying, okay, we've taken all this time, worked with these amazing companies, and the best thing we've come out with is a lot of wisdom. We've learned the pros and cons, and what we ultimately realized is that beta testing, which is what we spent a lot of time really talking about, was an idea. It wasn't a system. It wasn't a process. It was something that everybody recognized, but everybody would interpret a little bit differently, and everybody was kind of reinventing the wheel over and over. And the nature of working with a bunch of very large companies meant they each wanted, to some degree, to have the opportunity to influence that wheel. And therefore, it got pretty complex. And what I eventually described to my team is that, one of our challenges, it's a benefit, blessing and a curse, is that most of our customers use about a third of our product, but it's always a different third. And they're sort of required to figure that out. And again, at that large enterprise scale with those big brands, that can make some sense. They have big dedicated teams that are solving this problem and are very passionate about it. But the reality is the vast majority, first of all, the vast majority of companies aren't that large, but more importantly, this is a decentralized responsibility. This is something that product managers are typically taking on because it relates so closely to their goals and what's keeping them up at night. So what we spent virtually all of COVID doing from home, like everyone else, was rebuilding crucial parts of the tool in a much more prescriptive manner. And we took everything we learned and said, okay, this is a path that is scalable for anyone, all the way up to those largest enterprises. And there's going to be a hell of a lot less guesswork and building here. We're going to allow you to pop in the features that you want tested, and the system is then going to take much more advanced technology to take advantage of your list and prescribe it to the testers, engage them, understand them, build profiles on them, and effectively automate user testing. So when we talk about Delta, it is basically beta in a modern context that's really focused on automation. How do we make this something that a product manager can do with very limited time? Which, again, leads us back to this kind of recession idea that now that you have pretty suddenly, in many cases, fewer resources to get, in some cases, the same job done, we sort of position it as a force multiplier. The idea is that you can have a single person now who can take advantage of the fact that you probably have hundreds of customers who are passionate about your product. They see it as solving a problem they have, be it boredom or a work problem or anything in between. They want to help. They want to volunteer their time to be part of shaping the solution to their problem. And simply connecting those dots, it kind of doubles down the value in a recession, because you don't have all the people and the internal time and resources that you may have had, in the heyday. So that kind of force multiplier concept of here's a system that you can leverage for a single individual in a part-time capacity to collect sentiment and issues and praise and ideas from hundreds to thousands of people, with the system doing most of the work, is a way to combat those very limited resources in a time when, again, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle at all times. So we're very passionate about providing something to companies that can just work and help them get through the recession and still produce the best product possible.
Well, the great news is it's not a vanity project. So you've not built something that makes your emails look pretty or something like that. The testing is core, right? It's core. It's not something you can live without. You have to test. And so making that more efficient and making that cost the cost of that as low as it can be compared to building an enormous team and trying to build it all yourself. I think of it a little bit like in the video game industry, we used to always make our own game engines. And then there was this company, Epic, was building this one called Unreal. And at the time, it's like, but everyone builds their own. I guess they can build their own too. But their point was really valid, which is we have a whole team of people, an army of people working all day, every day on building this engine. Do you want to all replicate that? Is that necessary use of your funds? And so, why not use their engine? And of course, the whole industry's pretty much pivoted that way. There's only a couple of engines that the vast majority of software is generated on now in the games business. And so I do think that that's an important piece of it, is you're building core tech that's required for companies, and if anything, to make their software better or their product better. And so that's the great news. The Centercode's making something very, very important.
Yeah. Luke said it a couple times, but that idea of do more with less, especially during this uncertainty that we're in. Like I'd love to hear your guys' definition or what you guys think do more with less actually means to you. Like, I think that's something interesting.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of not getting bloated and having everything, in large. It's easy to sort of keep making things more and more complex, and yet the speed at which things can operate and the efficiency go up dramatically if you can simplify that. And so, do more with less for me is more about having such a clear direction and such a clear idea of what you're doing that everyone is working towards that as efficiently as they possibly can. It's when it's there's that saying, like, how do you climb a mountain one step at a time? But it's the people that get lost in the fog are the ones that die on the mountain. And so just being very clear on what it is you're trying to build, and then using technologies and people that will get you to that goal really, really quickly is the ultimate way to develop and save an enormous amount of money.
I agree with everything Dave just said, and I'll add 2 anecdotes of my own. So you mentioned earlier about kind of visits to Valve. I've had a couple friends at Valve for a very long time, and I, earlier in my career had been pushed to go there, and that would be kind of my second dream job to this one. This one still takes the lead, but that's interesting. And I'll tell you, the one, they knew what they were doing when they pitched me, because they walked me into the room of the group of people that had just created a game called Portal, which was like a mind-blowingly amazing thing at the time. And his literal, this was never, like, money was never discussed. His literal pitch was, wouldn't it be cool to be surrounded by people this smart? That was his whole pitch. And for me, that sort of translates to a term of talent density. I've always sort of positioned Centercode as I would rather have fewer smarter people around me than people who just want to do a job. So part of it is about, finding people that are very passionate about what you're trying to do. And I think you'll do more with less in that regard. I think that's very important. And another mantra that Chris will know well, having worked at Centercode, is sort of the age-old use all parts of the buffalo idea. That anything that we build, anything that we use, we want to absolutely maximize. And, the way we market as a company is anything we build, we want everybody inside the company to benefit from it first. And, so that we're all aligned and all have the same knowledge. And then as it goes out, everything is on as many platforms, as many forums to get as many people as possible, because we don't want to waste energy. We don't want to ever just use something once. So for me, kind of along with what Dave said, I think it's about having, being surrounded by smart people that really care about what you're doing. They're going to, work smarter. And then it really is about just looking at everything in terms of maximizing it. So for me, that's kind of how we run the company day to day.
When we recruit people, we tell them that we're allergic to the concept of hurdle pointers. These are people who point at problems all the time, but just talk about them. You see that problem over there? That's why we're not moving forward. And you see that problem over there? That stopped us too. And it's like, those people drive me nuts. And so those part of finding talent is finding the people that jump hurdles and kick them over. I actually like them to kick them out of the way. Those are great people. I call them the 10Xers, and the more of those you can get around you, the better. And it's just the whole thing just works better when that happens.
So years ago, Dave introduced the term 10Xer to me in a board meeting. And I'm going to go ahead and stroke your ego a little bit right now, Chris, because you don't know this, Dave. We haven't talked about this. But the moment that he said that, and he specifically asked me to sort of point one out and talk about him, Chris, at that time, was the one I talked about. It was a good 5 years ago. He was still relatively new to the company. But he was exactly that guy. So I love being surrounded by 10Xers. It's a phenomenal way to think.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I mean, I see that in Luke too. That's what drew me to Centercode. Is I've never seen I was passionate about solving the problem of tech. Like, I worked at Western Digital. I picked up books. I learned about research. I got into testing. I was really interested in talking with real people that use the product. And I was so passionate going and talking to product and engineering teams of, we have to solve these problems. Like, we need to solve these for the customers. And I meet with Luke, and he had that on this very grand scale of, he wanted to do that for every company. He wanted to make every company produce better technology and just make everyone's lives better that use it. And Luke sends me a message almost every day where we talk about different products that are coming out. We talk about things that are that we think could be better or be improved, things that we really like. Like we constantly talk about video games of elements that we like. We were talking about, was it Ghost of Tsushima, where they have the wind that blew in a direction. You talked about the sparkly handle, Dave, and it's like the wind that blew in the direction of where you should be going. And I'm like, this is captivating. Like, this is beautiful, and it's very purpose built. Like it solves both things. And like that, the passion that Luke had and us noticing these things is just it drew me. And I think by having the like mind and sharing a passion, you get to the 10xer of someone that has the passion. Now you just need to be enabled to go out and get it. And that's the doors that have been opened to me, is go figure out how to help make technology better. And we have like-minded people, and we all work in that direction. And it seems like you share that same likeness, Dave.
Yeah, I believe we can recruit people from anywhere, from any company, and the conversation usually goes something along the lines are you washing the dishes? And what I mean by that is, you're in some big company, it's got a great brand, it's awesome, but you're washing the dishes. You're just every day the same day, and you're in your cubicle or you're doing whatever you're being told to do, but you're not inventing, and you're not surrounded by people inventing. And that's actually what they yearn to do. And so it's very easy to pull people out of what sounded like a great role, but they're kind of parked and they're not really challenged creatively. Instead, they want to go somewhere where you're breaking new ground on a daily basis. Like everything we face, we can't copy anybody because no one's done this yet. And that's incredibly compelling to hiring talent.
Yeah. One thing that stands out to me, and just as we're talking to this, is sometimes I think we have customers that are almost in that same likeness, the 10xers of customer base. Like, there's some customers that go above and beyond. One of the content pieces we're working on coming up is about brand evangelists, and like how you take someone that is essentially, interested, very loyal to your brand, and what you get out of them. What's the power that they hold in convincing and referring your product to other people, and they're more willing to buy the products that you produce. And we use a lot of those people as what we call just beta testers, the people that come in and give us feedback. Do you guys see anything in terms of your customers and how they can help you do more with less in these times?
Well, definitely in our case, yes. So the company I'm currently building is helping brands to collaborate with each other. And so one of the most important things with brands, if you think about it, is attention. You'll never meet a brand that's like, please, no more attention. They can never get enough. It's an insatiable thing. That's why they're always doing PR and marketing and social media and whatever. It's just more and more and more attention. So that was one thing we were thinking about. Is there any way we can help them with attention? And the second thing that we thought about was, can we help get them more sales? These are two very critical things. And so as far as our business goes, we're basically thinking, what is the most simple way that could happen for all of us? How do we make that a win for everybody in the least complicated way? And so the idea we came up with was quite simple, was today, if you make a product and you get it into a major retailer like Target or Costco or something like that, it's very exciting because you're getting their foot traffic for free. And so we sort of realized, who's doing that for you online? Like, who's taking your product and trying to get it into lots of retail stores? And there isn't really anybody that does that for you. And so that's what we started to build our technology to do. So we can actually take your product, like say you make helmets, we can get them put into a bike store. And the way it works is it just wires the two companies together. So you don't actually, it's virtual wholesale. So you don't actually have to send, freight a whole bunch of helmets to their warehouse, and then they have to guess what colors and sizes are going to sell. This idea of just making business more efficient and simple, because their inventory becomes the inventory of the bike company. So now the bike company has every helmet in every color and every size. And this is just how you can use digital technology to very much move things forward and remove cost and complexity, increase margins. And in this case, by putting your products. Can you imagine how valuable that traffic is? Someone's in a bike store online thinking of buying a bicycle, and there's your helmet. That's a pretty interesting, visitor versus just putting a banner somewhere on the internet where there's bicycles somewhere. Yeah. And by the way, this traffic is free because you decided to partner together. So this idea of brands collaborating, I think, is a very interesting space that surprisingly most e-commerce companies today actually build their company alone. They're on the internet alone. They go to Shopify, or they go to Magento, and they'll help you actually technically stand up a store, but then you're on your own. It's considered headless commerce because they don't give you any traffic. They just give you technology to build your store. And so for me, this has been a fascinating space. I mean, who am I to be in e-commerce, right? I'm from the video game business, but you look at any space and you say, is there any way that we could make this, simplify it or find ways to get people to sort of approach it from a different angle? And I really believe when you look at just about any direction in any industry, there's just so much opportunity. And that's why I think in the testing space, it's actually, you go testing, oh yeah, we've been doing that for years. Not at all. Not the way it can be done. And I think one of the things, Luke, that you touched on earlier was this idea of the knowledge that you're learning as you work with so many companies. To you, that might seem like, yeah, of course, that's how it works. But if you're a new company who's just building your first product, like your Kickstarter just got funded really well, you don't have any of that knowledge. And so how do they work with Centercode and actually get that knowledge from you is really, I guess, my question.
Yeah, I mean, that core competency of Epic and Unreal is exactly that, right? It's just hit the ground running. So, yeah, for us, that one of the first sort of loves of mine in the company was the recognition of content marketing. And it's a story I've told a billion times, and it's something I'm enthusiastic about to every founder I ever speak to is, one of the most important things about attracting an audience for me has always been get rid of the idea of secret sauce. Everything you've learned is of value in building authority for you. So we've spent an enormous amount of time learning. I think that, and as you guys have both touched on, is, that and our logo list is the two biggest assets as a company we have. Connect those two dots, and we have the opportunity to save a lot of companies just tens of thousands of hours, and giving them a system that they can use to get through these problems without having to learn every painful lesson that we did and you have in your past and so on. So yeah, very important to me. For us, our customers are obviously a really big part of everything we build. One of my biggest concerns right now is sort of what the world has sort of shifted there. We don't travel as much, we don't get in front of people as much, and just being engaged with customers is more challenging than it was 3-4 years ago. Employee engagement is another problem. Something we talk about a lot is now that we're all diverse and all over and don't have the opportunity to sit in a whiteboard and sit on a whiteboard in a conference room and really get to know each other. How do we get close? And that for us spawned this whole new generation of dog fooding as a priority, and making sure that companies can get to know their employees or have their products And companies can get their employees closer to the company through their products, through the things that they're co-building, as a means to not only produce a better product and higher quality, but also take advantage of those employees being dispersed, yet needing to be connected to the product, the team, the company, and so on.
One thing I'd like to kind of pick up on is we're in these times of uncertainty, right? You both are executives. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, do you have different expectations in product development now that the economy is like in a weird situation?
I think for me, the economy being down is actually, if anything, a call to arms that we need to help the customers and brands that we work with. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's less, it's really go time. We actually came up with the core idea for our company during COVID. So it was at the very beginning of COVID, we were like, we need to help brands. This is going to get really, really uncertain here. And what can we do to help them through this time? Recession's the same thing. So it's more of a call to arms to help them when they need it. And I think Centercode faces the same challenges.
Yeah, early in COVID, I changed my signature on my email to wartime CEO, which I've had 1,000 comments and compliments on. And it was really about me sort of starting to seed that thought to the whole team that, we're going to have to think a little bit differently. We're going to have to get a little bit more aggressive. And that was COVID. And really what that was about was absolute uncertainty, right? If you go back 2 years, we had no idea where things were going and how long this was going to last. And we just didn't know what was around the curve. I look at the recession a little bit different personally. And I think Dave, to some degree, might as well, in that a recession is a shift that is reasonably predictable in terms of what the impact is going to be. We've had them before. We have them every decade. And for my company, and I would guess for Dave's as well, there's going to be a few hurdles, and you have to think about the job market and whatnot, but it's actually more opportunity than not. I think products like ours can shine in a recession. I think in our case, because we can act as a force multiplier to help fewer resources do more, we can be a solution to some of the near-term problems that they're facing, and we can help them sleep at night. And I know a good deal about Dave's company. I'm a big fan of it, and I think he's got some of the same opportunities and benefits as as a CEO, you can't just shut down and go into a fetal position every time the recession hits. You have to say, okay, it's going to happen. It's macro. It's outside my control. What can I do about it? How does our business react to it? And how do we take advantage of it? Ultimately, how do we turn these lemons into lemonade? So for us, that's a big priority. Is how do we help more companies and as a result succeed more in a recession? And then when the recession's over, we'll change our gear to figure out, okay, now how does this apply to the good times?
Yeah, I love that temporal nature of like there's a temporal mission going on. You have your ultimate mission of you want to make products better, and then during this time, how do we help? How do we get that in front of people to help their business, because companies are struggling all of us. There's layoffs, there's fewer people, there's stress. I see it. I talked to a few people that have survived the layoff wave, and they're left to their own devices. There's very few people. There is less budget at the place that they're working at, and they need to figure out how to still get a good product out the door, because that good product means that's revenue coming back to the company. That's going to help the company ultimately. So like that, I love that mission, that submission of like, let's help during this time. It's a little bit different when times are going well and all that's cool, but right now everyone needs help. Every company needs help, right? And it's the banding together to get something like Dave and his company, like getting those two companies together to help each other is huge, right? That just it seems like a good message to me.
I think the challenge we face, and Dave and I shared a quick email about it the other day. I actually really appreciated his thoughts on it. Is one of the bigger challenges is just kind of moving the ship. So I think we have a great opportunity to help a lot of companies get through this. The challenge is getting those companies aware of that and making sure that they're thinking this way. Because, yeah, they're all thinking about testing because, as Dave said, it's something critical. Everybody has to test. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're thinking about, okay, well, how can testing get me through this? How can it help me alleviate other shortfalls that have suddenly been forced upon me? And if we can get that word out, then I think everybody can benefit a lot. And that's really what we're trying to do.
So basically, in the game industry, we learned about this idea of the funnel, meaning that there's all of these steps where you're losing people. And it is quite shocking. I mean, it's one of those things that a lot of companies don't really take the time to analyze every single point at which their customers will maybe use their product less or stop using the product. And all of those different stages can be adjusted. And I think that's one of the pieces of the puzzle that probably can have the biggest difference, is actually taking the time to understand that. And when you're doing your testing, really taking the time to understand where the losses are, where, if you think of a bucket, where are the holes in the bucket and people are pouring out. And the reason is because it can profoundly increase the overall sort of happiness at the far end of the funnel and how many people are making it to the end of it. And so every hole that you block, it might seem trivial. It's just like I've seen situations, I kid you not, where people will have a 50% drop off because they asked for an email address at the wrong time. And it's like, what? That sounds crazy. But in reality, there are always ways. And we in the game industry, what we learned was if we get a point, like if you're playing a video game and everyone's leaving the game or not completing level 5, then we would actually think to ourselves, what can we do to get you to go to level 6? So in level 5, we'd say, here's a horse or a sword or something you can only use in level 6. And so they're in level 5 with this really cool item they're about to be able to use at level 6, and we get them across that bridge. And so looking for those holes in the bucket and trying to block them can have an absolutely profound impact on the amount of revenue you can generate at the far end and the engagement that you can get with the audience. So you don't want to lose anybody in that funnel. And testing is obviously a very, very key piece of that, because you're not just plugging the hole and you have to see what difference that made. And obviously in certain cases, just removing the hole, not plugging it, not having that hole. Do we have to ask for the email address right now? Is that actually really helping anything right now? Because we're guilty of this in our own product. I see us asking for things before we need them. And so effectively, we've decided to add a hole to the bucket. I don't know why. And we have to get that out of there. And so there's ways in a recession to really start analyzing that. Where are the holes in the bucket? Do we have to even have the holes? Can we plug them? Can we test that? And the amount of impact you can have as far as sales lift could easily override the negativity of the recession.
That's a brilliant take. I worked for a company previous to Centercode where we released a very technical product to a reasonably mainstream audience. And we had this thing that I will never forget, which was our return rate on that product. It was something that sold at like Best Buy and whatnot. And it was a physical product with a software component to it. A lot of moving parts. And the return rate was over 50%, which is a death knell in that. Mm-hmm. But what was crazy, that wasn't the crazy part. The crazy part was that something like 75% of the returns, the plastic in the box containing all of the stuff wasn't opened. So what they eventually realized, way too late, was people bought the product, opened it, said, oh my God, that's a lot. Closed the product and took it back.
Oh, man.
And they didn't even open it. And this was just a gap in their testing. They did experiential testing on the product itself, but the out-of-the-box section just never got the love it needed from the right audience. And there's an image I've been floating around internally within Centercode that we're planning to use shortly. And what it's really sort of saying is that many companies right now think of their primary ways of testing as kind of QA testing and focused on quality issues. Does it work? And then the UX side of real-time video stuff and whatnot of does it do what the customer wants, and in a very temporal way. And they sort of think of those two as kind of the half of the test, each halves of the testing. And what we've sort of realized and explored is there's something in the middle. And that middle is kind of breaks down into a couple of things. One, it's the real world function of that product from a quality perspective of once it gets into a dirty environment with a crazy Wi-Fi network with 30 things on it that you couldn't predict in a lab, is it working? So that's sort of patching a hole on the quality side. And then on the other side, and I think this is where you're talking about the leaky bucket analogy, which I love, is the feature adoption over time. Is each of these things that go beyond that initial UX interview and those short-term, real quick turnarounds, is once this product is absorbed or sort of soaked into its real environment, are there things that are going to be a huge turnoff that even if it seemed like a good idea up front, you don't really use it much anymore? And I think there's products in VR that have this challenge in a very severe way. There's a lot of things that the product is initially exciting and the initial sales are great, but the fall off is extreme. The next generation doesn't succeed. There's all sorts of problems that follow. And what we've seen is that successful user testing, long-form user testing, what we would call Delta, can increase pretty much any product by about a star rating if you're looking at that 5. And my sort of view that I'm trying to get out there is you've got the UX on one side and the QA on one side, and you think your testing is covered, but there's this hole in the middle where that star is hiding. And that hole is your real users over time kind of adopting this product, finding those leaky holes and whatnot, fixing them before it's too late, and then you have that truly successful product, which again, in recession, when you have half the products, and by the way, we do work with a lot of companies. We get to hear about a lot of roadmaps, and that's not an uncommon thing to hear this year. Is my roadmap just got cut in half? I need to do a lot more with half the products, and that is such a meaningful thing for the success of those companies and those product owners. So to me, that's kind of the missing gap that we're trying to fill. Is you've got your testing out there already that covers that real-time experience and that quality, but there's something more about how people interact with product when it's on their own terms over a period of time that can really expose a lot more. And that's where our passion lies.
So I hope in future podcasts that you're going to really cover more of those kind of examples, because frankly, if you're responsible for testing, to have all of those sort of real world, oh man, I never even thought about that. The last thing you want is them to open the box and close it, right? That's a disaster. That's an absolute disaster, but I get it, right? You can imagine all the testing that went into the product and making sure the interface and the UI and everything's perfect, but they never get there because they look at it and just go, "Oh, that's a nightmare." And I get it. I bought an e-bike recently, and what was funny was I went on YouTube to see how to build it, and it's hours and hours and hours of lots of wiring, lots of complexity. I mean, spiders' nests of cabling. And I looked at it and just went, "Oh no, like this is a disaster."
I've got about 3 or 4 of those products in my home office right now, still in their boxes.
Yeah. So yeah, and I have one actually. I just got a whole new VR gaming thing downstairs that I just know when I start, it's going to take me hours to get it all. Working. It's called Tilt 5. Have you heard of that yet?
No.
Which is it's like this tabletop game system. So you put this shiny silvery surface on your table, and it reflects. You're wearing actually. This sounds crazy, but you're wearing glasses that are actually projecting an image that bounces straight back into your eyes on this very special surface. So you're looking at your game in 3 dimensions on top of your table. And I'm super excited about this. I know it's going to be awesome. I've actually tried a demonstration of it once. It's going to be awesome to have it, but I just know opening that box and getting it compatible with my computer and everything's just going to, I mean, can you imagine my 82-year-old mother trying to get that working? It's impossible.
Yeah.
And so this is really important stuff. And I think that if you in future podcasts cover it and sort of explain very clear examples that are almost head-slappingly dangerous moves, then hopefully you'll help some people avoid some real pain and suffering in the future. Again, I think that's sort of leadership position that Centercode is creating.
I agree. My version, and it's kind of a happy ending, I guess, of your story, is when my mother, who first got obsessed with Alexa as a solution for her house, she just loved the idea, which blew my mind. Not a technical person. And I remember going to her house and having to set that up. And at the time, it was a nightmare. It was really challenging to get it on the network. Wi-Fi was a mess. She wanted them in a couple of rooms, and getting them to sync was a nightmare. And it was just such a pain. And this week, just coincidentally, the new Echoes came out, and they have Eero support, which means they'll act not only as an Echo, but as a way to extend the mesh network in your house. So I purchased and replaced a few of those to kind of put across my house. And I was stunned at how easy the setup was. Now, we're 5th generation. They're literally Echo Dot 5 versus her 1s. I was stunned at how easy, just blew my mind how well it worked, how fast it worked, how easy it was. But the reality is most companies don't have Amazon's money and opportunity to get 5 generations in before they truly get it right. Most companies are going to disappear or lose interest long before that. So that's where, I wish that the one 5 years ago wasn't quite the nightmare, but it is nice to see it persevere. And it's wonderful to see when technology truly does work, when it is useful. And, it's the thing, and this is maybe a note to sort of close some of this on, but it's I look forward to the time when it's not a surprise when it works well. I find that so much technology, I'm delighted at the fact that it worked because I expected it not to, as opposed to I'm just delighted at the value it brings to my life, which is what it really should be.
Yeah, I agree completely, and it is a pleasure when something works. I went on a bike ride with a friend on the weekend, and we both had the same helmets, and it turns out our helmets allow us to just talk to each other, and they're hands-free. So it just, as we're riding, you can just say, hey, look over there, what about this? And it's great to have a conversation while you're riding. But, you know, that could be really painful. And so they had this simple thing where we both had their app installed, and we're like, we're going to have to go type in serial numbers or something. And it just basically said, point your camera at his app. And we did. And they had a QR code on there. And the two helmets just synced. And it was just like, oh, thank you. We can go for the ride now. I was prepared for like a 30-minute, this is going to be a whole pain, but it's worth it because once it works, it's great.
Yeah.
But when you go, oh, actually, we're probably, 45 seconds in and we've solved the problem, it's amazing. And so I applaud the companies that really put your time first.
Yeah, my variant of this was last night. I installed a new Apple TV. The new Apple TV came out, which, for the record, big Apple fan, but I can't tell the difference between the new Apple TV and the last one. But the first thing I had to do before my wife could use it was re-log into every single app on that device. And Apple is known for producing brilliant user experiences that are typically flawless, but they're also an ecosystem, and they ultimately don't put a lot of control, as much as you might think, on those individual apps. And what blew my mind is we've moved long past cable, and we must subscribe to half a dozen of the common streaming services, Hulu, Netflix, and whatnot. Literally every single one of them on Apple TV had an entirely different process for how to log in. Some are a QR code. The YouTube one is load up your YouTube app on your phone. Others are just a username and password. Suddenly, Hulu and Disney Plus need me to share a password, so that involved recreating everything. Like, it was a 45-minute process to get it to a workable state. And honestly, the only reason I did it was so that I wouldn't have to deal with my wife's coming after me for not having it done. But even that's just an example of, like, Apple put out a gorgeous product, but the ecosystem extends it. And my user experience isn't so much that I'm judging those individual apps. I'm judging the product I just added to the network, which happens to be this new Apple TV. So came away a little soured as a result. And it's simply because, I felt endless confusion as I was going through, like, why is this so different? Why is this so complicated? As I'm pulling out my laptop to match, one password to every one of these individual apps and pray that it's all not outdated and yada yada. So we have a lot of room to hit the ceiling of technology being wonderful.
Have you ever considered, like, forming consortiums for different it could be protocols, or could be making it so that companies can collaborate better and make putting the customer first all the time, so that the customers sort of transition from one device to another. The standards become really clean and clear. Like, you see, for example, this idea of attaching a device to a television. It quite commonly says go to Amazon.com/code and type in this code, but everyone does it just a little different.
Actually, more differently than I thought. I feel like they all change it every month, and I do this once every other year. And last night's version was crazy how different they all are. They're all just experimenting.
Yeah, and so everyone's doing everything their own way, and that's still, and so to some extent, I think potentially Centercode could get some, because you're dealing with these companies, get them around a table and start to invite in the ones that normally don't want any help, and try to get them around a table and say, look, this is an entirely customer focused concept. We have to put them first, and then if everyone agrees, like, this is a good way to handle that, and we start seeing more standardization because of Centercode, that would be a gold star. It'd be wonderful. Would love that.
I agree completely, and I'll add it to Chris's ever-growing list.
Chris,
I like that
Chris,
a lot.
Can you solve that? Make that happen, Chris.
Yes. I'd love to solve that. I hate that. That is my least favorite thing, is setting up a new TV or having to log in. We set up a TV in my daughter's room, and I'm just like, I do not want to have to go remember all the passwords for each of these things and go log in. And some are that code, some are absolutely not related, and like will have a reset password, and I end up resetting my password more often than not, which disconnects all the other devices, and then I have to redo that. It's a nightmare.
You're also not referencing that they've layered on completely unique approaches to parental controls on every single one of these as well.
Different codes.
There is an uncomfortable amount of anxiety associated with, am I truly locked down? And I'm sure, I know Dave has a daughter. I'm sure he has the same problem to some degree. We are some of the most techie folk out there, and I still have that anxiety of what's really going on, and it's pretty mind blowing. So I'm with you on that.
Well, Chris is going to solve it, so we're fine now. We're good.
Yeah,
thank you, Chris.
Why we got together today. I think that is, I always credit Dave for never bringing a small idea to the table. And even if, some of them are so pie in the sky that they're way outside our reach, they always force us to think a little bit differently and a little bit bigger. And, for example, community and finding better ways for our customers to interact has been a priority for a while that we, to be honest, haven't really fulfilled. It's just priority-wise, it's been rough. But that taking that a step further is so much more value, but more importantly, like it directly aligns with my passion. It directly aligns with the mission of the company and what I've been working to get my whole team to be passionate about. And again, most of them came in with that. That is just a next step to solving that problem and sort of identifying that, hey, we already work with these guys. We are their connection between them and their customers. We orchestrate that. We facilitate that. There's a lot more we could do, and we could take that a step
Big
forward.
Time. I'll give you an example. Is when we were making video games, there was this exhibition that was set up at E3, which is like a major convention for video games, and they created this, red, sort of a red velvet rope, glasses of champagne, looking at the art from the artists in the game industry, and it sort of made me realize how our artists, no one really ever takes the time to do that, and the fact that they were so proud of standing there with the nicely framed piece of their art, and all these people coming through and checking it out, and people were actually buying the things for charity as well. But this idea of there's people in your group or in your team that have these skills that are maybe underappreciated. When you think about that across all of your customers, is there anyone across all of your customers that's really passionate about shipping, right? The answer is yes. There's going to be someone in your community that is super passionate about shipping, and maybe you can help them help the other people in your community. Like, what's the best way to create packaging and get your shipping costs down, and all the learnings from the people who've shipped maybe tens of millions of boxes. I'd be fascinating to hear their input as well. So to some extent, helping your community help the rest of your community by finding the people that have knowledge that's so valuable, but no one's asking, right?
Yeah,
no one's asking. I once went to a woodworking conference. I get all these crazy hobbies, and I'm at this thing, and this guy's talking about the best varnish he's ever used in 30 years of woodworking, and it's just, it's. I said to him afterwards, you probably just think, well, it's just the varnish I use. What's the big deal? That's after 30 years of trying everything. You just told me the one that's the best, and guess what? It's great. I've used it, and so those nuggets are out there. Somehow you just have to help your community help itself, and so I think that's a good long-term goal for you if you can do that. No one's asking them those questions, but others would love to know the answers if you could get it to them.
So that's a great take. I specifically told Chris today that I'm very excited about sort of this format of bringing in outside guests and having a series of questions. And I think what you just said, he can really take to heart and can kind of shape the future of this, because we do have those people. We have the people who are very passionate about their dog fooding program at their company and how it's brought the team closer together. We have people who are very passionate about how their testing program really showed their customers that they care about what they have to say and that they're here for them, and they have stories to tell about that. So the hope and the future of this podcast is really driven around that. We want to bring in some great industry people who can help everyone else who's trying to solve these problems. And that varnish tactic saved you 30 years.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. And
Yeah.
now
A lot
you
of pain.
can focus on other things and having more fun. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd love to keep talking, but I think we should close down the session. Very inspiring and motivating conversations and answers to questions. I'm gonna end it with a thank you for joining us. All right. You guys have a good one.
Thanks for inviting me. It was so much fun.
Thank you, Dave, for coming.
Thank you for listening to the Delta Huddle Podcast. If you enjoyed today's podcast, feel free to subscribe via Spotify. If you want to know more about Delta testing and maximizing the impact of your user tests, head over to Centercode.com. You'll find a host of resources like ebooks and webinars to help you get started. This has been the Delta Huddle Podcast by Centercode. We'll see you again in the next episode. Happy testing.